Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Wolanski, and I am the director of the Alliance for Nonprofit Impact at United Way. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this briefing. We know that there's been a lot going on, and it's very hard to keep up with, and it's a lot of it is destabilizing. So, thank you for the work that you continue to do, that you persist with, even as there's so much uncertainty and change that we're dealing with right now. So thank you. First, I want to recognize that this has been an exhausting few weeks, and probably not just for you and your organizations, but also for the people that you serve. And so thank you for being there for them. Thank you for continuing to fight the good fight, even when we have a lot of obstacles in our midst. So thank you for that. What we're going to do today is we are going to I'm going to give you some background. We have Jennifer Wood with us today from Center for Justice, who is an amazing resource. And she's going to share a little bit some things to think about in terms of immigration and just kind of the legal landscape right now. And then I'm going to go give some more updates about some of the specific cases and challenges that are winding their way through the courts, as well as some of the advocacy work that the Alliance is doing and that we would love to have you join us for. We are going to be doing briefings every other week for the foreseeable future so that we are able to give you the latest information. We'll continue to be providing that through our newsletters as well, but know that so much is changing all the time and really want to make sure that you have what you need to do the work that you are doing so well. So we all know that with the new administration has been releasing a lot of executive orders and making policy changes. They're appointing new secretaries of different departments as they're getting confirmed. We know that there's a lot happening with the Department of Governmental Efficiency, as they're calling it, which we all have feelings about. I'm not going to be really looking at that because it is kind of out of our scope, but we know that that will also have impact. The financial and fiscal impact of the work that they're doing will impact the work that you do as well. But I wanted to start with what is an executive order. I think that there is some misunderstanding about what an executive order is and can and can't do. And so there's a really helpful explainer on the ACLU, National ACLU website. So I just wanted to read a short part of that so that you have some additional information about that. And Jen can also weigh in on that. But Article 2 of the Constitution vests in the president with executive power over the government, including the obligation to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, unquote. And so an executive order is a directive signed by the president that orders the government to take specific actions to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed. So it might mean telling the Department of Education to implement a certain rule or declaring a new policy priority. But executive orders cannot override federal laws and statutes. Statutes have to be passed by Congress and signed by the president. Or if they're vetoed, then Congress has to override the veto to become law. So executive orders can't preempt that process. Also, the Constitution gives Congress control over things like taxation, spending, and certain war powers. Most of the things we think of when we think of laws come from Congress. What counts as a criminal offense, how much the federal government can tax our income, declaring war, making treaties, all those things are things that are congressional power. With an executive order, the president cannot write a new statute. But an order can tell federal agencies how to implement a statute. So, for example, Congress can declare a certain drug legal or illegal. And by an executive order, the president can tell the Department of Justice if prosecuting that certain drug is a priority or not. So, how to implement what Congress has said. So, with an executive order, President Trump can order the federal government to take any steps that are within the scope of the constitutional authority of the executive branch and do not violate any federal law. Um, so, that is where we're seeing constitutional challenges come up with people going to court to try and prove that what the executive order says is in conflict with a federal statute or with the Constitution, and therefore can't be implemented because the executive order does not have the power to override a statute or the Constitution. So I think that we aren't hearing enough about that, about what is actually what power comes behind an executive order. And so I just wanted to share that first. Secondly, the American Bar Association its president just released a statement that about the things that are going on in DC. And I thought it would be helpful as well just to read two quotes from this. It has been 3 weeks since Inauguration Day. Most Americans recognize that newly elected leaders bring change. That is expected, but most Americans also expect that changes will take place in accordance with the rule of law and in an orderly manner that respects the lives of affected individuals and the work they've been asked to perform. Instead, we see a wide scale affronts to the rule of law itself, such as attacks on constitutionally protected birthright citizenship, the dismantling of USAID, and the attempts to criminalize those who support lawful programs to eliminate bias and enhance diversity. What we're hearing in the executive orders is that it is unlawful to have DEI programs, for example. And so what the president of the American Bar Association is reminding us is that those programs follow existing civil rights law. And so I just think that that's important to say because that's not a voice that we're hearing. He also says, moreover, refusing to spend money appropriated by Congress under the euphemism of a pause is a violation of the rule of law and suggests that the executive branch can overrule the other two co-equal branches of government. This is contrary to the constitutional framework and not the way our democracy works. The money appropriated by Congress must be spent in accordance with what Congress has said. It cannot be changed or paused because a newly elected administration desires it. Our elected representatives know this. The lawyers of the country know this. It must stop. So I think that is just a helpful reminder about kind of the legal parameters of what is being issued in DC. And I will say at this point, I am not a lawyer and I am not giving you legal advice, but I think that those are important voices that can help in this discussion. When we look at the executive orders that have come out, the National Council of Nonprofits has been tracking all of the orders as well as legal challenges and has a tracker that is kept up to date regularly. I will put the link. That is one of the links we're going to be giving you. But we also know that the primary areas that nonprofits are affected, the issue areas that are primarily, we have seen a direct impact on nonprofits have been obviously federal funding. So if you receive federal funding either directly from the federal government or federal funding funneled through the states, we've seen a lot of uncertainty about that with the freeze and then the rescission of the freeze, partial rescission of the freeze, whether they're implementing or not implementing the restraining orders. We can talk about that after Jen talks. But we also have seen significant impact to immigration work, DEI work, environmental justice work, and also issues around LGBTQ plus rights and recognition. And so those are all areas that are really significant for nonprofits. And so Jen, I asked Jen if she could just share some thoughts about immigration in particular right now, suggestions for nonprofits, things you should be thinking about, and then also just some thoughts about kind of the legal landscape right now and how nonprofits should be thinking about that as well. So, Jen, thank you so much for being here. And I want to say that Jen has been, she and her colleague Miriam Weisenbaum have been amazing supports to the Alliance and to nonprofits. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, their partnership with us moving forward. But I wanted to just give a thank you to start already to Jen.
Thanks, Nancy. And actually, I've been thinking this week how grateful I am that the Alliance exists, because that wasn't the case. And it's provided us an opportunity to be able to get the word out very expeditiously to folks. So I am Jen Wood, she, her pronouns. I am the executive director at the Rhode Island Center for Justice, which, like as with many of you, is a nonprofit organization, about 10 employees. And so I wear multiple hats, as many of you do, the fundraiser, the manager, and a practicing lawyer. So I'm walking the same path that all of you are walking right now in terms of trying to understand how the shifting landscape affects the operation of our small nonprofit. And I am a lawyer, and the reason I went to law school was to be able to be here and talk to you and support the people you serve and support you in fulfilling your missions today. So that's a good thing. When you go set out in life to do a thing and the thing turns out to be needed, that's a good thing. I wish it were not as hair on fire needed right now. Well, I want to really give you some framing in terms of the three primary areas of concern that we're trying to support our nonprofit partners and community members on right now. One is keeping the people you serve and support safe in your spaces and programs. So we're going to talk about immigration enforcement and other kinds of incursions on the safety and well-being of the people that you serve in your spaces and programs. The second is maintaining the integrity and values and mission of your organizations as nonprofits, and resisting and rebuffing attempts by government to impermissibly redefine who you are as organizations and what you do. And the third area is maintaining the flow of funding from government sources to nonprofits, which is a huge part of our sector, without inappropriate and illegal restrictions or changes being placed upon those funds. So those are the three domains that really all of these executive orders and lawsuits are swirling around. I'm going to work my way back up that list of three and end with keeping people safe in your spaces and programs, because I want to touch lightly on the other two. In terms of the funding battle, it is a battle royal. It is fully pitched, and you're going to have access to the litigation trackers and tools. The ABA statement is really on point. And I can say affectionately, as a member of the profession, the ABA is not a revolutionary organization. So when the ABA is coming out and saying, whoa, this is strenuously unconstitutional and completely illegal, that's a pretty remarkable moment, because as I said, the ABA is not a revolutionary organization. In fact, usually they're very circumspect about what they say. So they're right, of course, and I'm very proud to see that organization stepping up in a clear way. But it also is very indicative of how there's the gap between the usual practice in executive orders and the usual separation of powers and the way that is being implemented in the last 3 weeks. It's a dramatic departure from standard practice. Okay. The question is, will that dramatic departure be controlled by the federal courts? Because they're kind of the traffic cops when it comes to separation of powers. Fortunately for those of us in Rhode Island who've been around for a while, separation of powers is a very known dynamic in Rhode Island, because there was a rebrokering of the legislative, judicial, and executive branches in Rhode Island about 10, 15 years ago, maybe 20. And so we're familiar with this, not just from basic civics, but from the active dynamic on the ground in Rhode Island. That now is being contested at the national level. And the usual construct for executive orders is that the executive can only do the things that aren't specifically in the authority of someone else. So it's kind of a gap filler. Congress is really the actor when it comes to statutes and laws, and then agencies put into place regulations, and executive orders only fill in the gaps between those things. The dynamic right now, though, is that because both chambers of Congress are in the same party and largely aligned with the executive branch, the usual triangle isn't working. So I'm very concerned looking down the road at the fact that a lot of the lawsuits that are pending right now about funding freezes, funding availability, restraints on what agencies and nonprofits who are receiving funding can do, say, and think, are probably going to be won in the courts because, as Nancy already shared, it's illegal for the executive branch to just try and take over the role of Congress. However, that's only really a delay of game, because once the opportunity is put in place for the next budget to be built, for example, Congress could, at the request of the executive or influenced by the executive, kind of do the bidding of the administration in moving a lot of this money around. But right now, today, as you are serving people on the ground in our communities, they're not allowed to just turn off the spigot. So that's happening. In Rhode Island, we've stood up a group of volunteer lawyers, the Lawyers Committee for Rhode Island, to have a rapid response capability such that we're watching these national lawsuits happen around the funding flow and any restraints on your programming that would be impermissible, like saying you can't acknowledge that race and gender identity exist. Those kinds of restraints are clearly illegal for a number of reasons. And so we're trying to make sure that if any of your agencies receive specific instructions or funding termination notices to say, well, you're not doing the right kind of work because we don't think that the gender affirming care that you offer exists in the real world, and that's not a thing. Or if they say, equity and anti-racism are not permissible values to hold if you're receiving federal funds. Those are things where we hope to be able to provide support to the nonprofits in our community in collaboration with national work that's being done. And so I'm really going to drop a pin here to say, if you are facing those kinds of specific challenges, we hope that you can let Nancy know and get in touch with us so that we can support you and connect you to some of this national litigation. And I see that Lucy has a question.
I do. Thanks. First of all, thank you for everything that the Alliance is doing and for being on this call and organizing this space. We have received a directive for one of our funding streams. I'm happy to share it. I didn't know this was a space, for that type of support. So I'm really glad that I was able to join today. One of our funding streams comes to us through the CDC. And we did receive notice to stop all DEI related activities immediately and permanently. And then just today we got another one saying to stop any work that promotes gender ideology. So we have gotten that. We haven't gotten that from our other federal funding partners yet. But we did receive that. So I don't know if that's something, like, the best way to communicate that, is it to email it to you all, like to send you a copy of it? it's very vague, so we haven't stopped anything yet because we want to know what we can and what we can't. But also we're like, well, this can't be legal, so we're just going to keep doing the work until they tell us, until they stop us from doing it. But anyway, if I should be sending that to Nancy, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I can put us all three on an email chain.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And just for everyone's knowledge, we are collecting those artifacts, those notices, because as we try and map where Rhode Island nonprofits are going to fit into the national challenges, both as to what I'll refer to as a DEI ban, also as to something that is referred to as gender ideology, a term that did not exist before 3 weeks ago. Those we need to see those, and we need to share those with our national partners, because organizations here in Rhode Island may become part of those larger challenges, and that may offer some protection for your continued operation under your status quo approach until such time as a judge rules on whether that is unconstitutional or otherwise improper. Because those are the issues that are being raised in these cases, is to say, well, fine, you can declare that our nonprofit cannot do DEI work, however you define that, but if that's unconstitutional or contrary to statute, then that is not enforceable. And so, yes, continue to send our grant funds, and yes, we are going to continue to do this work. Karen, I see that you have a question.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Nancy and Jen, for all of this. This is incredibly helpful. So
give me 1 second, Karen. I just need to take 1 second to answer a question.
While Jen's answering the question, I will be sharing out Jen's contact information afterwards. Right now, the Lawyers Committee does not have kind of an intake process. So the Alliance is kind of serving as the intake for the Lawyers Committee. So if you need help from the Lawyers Committee, I'm happy to help facilitate that. But we are working to help them to get to the place where they have some infrastructure. But right now, the Alliance is serving as kind of the intake space for them. So I was just filling this.
And Karen, thank
you
so much, Nancy.
Yeah, so my quick question is, I had heard today that something came out from the White House about that they weren't just going to target those who have grants. They were going to target all nonprofits in terms of our nonprofit stats. I didn't know if that was true or if just someone had had read something wrong, or I think all of us should worry no matter what, but I didn't know if that was a new thing that you guys had heard about.
I have not, since 9 o'clock this morning, heard that is a new area of enforcement. It's one that I've been expecting all along, because all of us have to be approved by the IRS for our nonprofit status, et cetera, et cetera. So that is another lever that the executive branch could try and pull in terms of what are the acceptable practices and approaches for nonprofits. So I would not be surprised if that becomes an issue. It is not, to my knowledge, yet an actively engaged conflict.
Okay.
Yeah, the memo that was released, at least the last memo that I've heard about, was on the 7th that came out, and it basically, the subject was advancing U.S. interests when funding non-governmental organizations. So it was focused on funding issues, but it was much broader than some of the other ones, because it basically says to review all funding that agencies provide to NGOs, the heads of agencies shall align future funding decisions with the interests of the United States and with the goals and priorities of my administration, as expressed in executive actions and otherwise determined by the agency. So it's much broader. It doesn't have specific issue areas. It's overall alignment. But so far, I haven't seen anything that is targeting tax status. We did see that in the congressional bill that passed the House last session about the terrorism component, how that they could unilaterally decree that a nonprofit was supporting terrorist organizations and without due process removed their 501c3. That has not yet been
Can you try and find
reintroduced
it?
into
I don't know.
this new session, but
I don't either.
it may be.
Thank you.
Thanks. One sec.
So the that piece of legislation was HR 9495 or 8485, and at the time it did not, it couldn't be introduced in the Senate because we had a Democratic leadership there that wouldn't introduce it. Now it wouldn't pass a filibuster, like it doesn't, you wouldn't be able to get 60 votes for it. And it doesn't have a financial aspect, so it couldn't be included in reconciliation. Now, if they change it somehow and include some kind of a fiscal implication, then it could be included in a reconciliation bill that would only need Republican votes. But as of now, the way it was constructed in the last Congress, it would not be able to be passed through reconciliation.
So I want to shift a little bit to talking about the other two factors: maintaining the integrity of your programs and fulfilling your missions, and keeping the people you serve safe and served consistent with your mission in your space. As to the content of programming, because I think all of us are going to be getting certain kinds of notices that suggest that there are restraints on the kinds of ways in which we can serve the people we serve. There are going to be a lot of constitutional issues involved there because of the First Amendment. And so while there can be and are and traditionally have been constraints on the receipt of federal funds, typically the boundaries of that are that you have to do the work consistent with federal and state law and regulation. So every grant I've ever signed, every grant agreement I've ever signed says, I hereby affirm that I'm going to follow the anti-discrimination laws of the United States of America, and then they're listed, and I'm like enthusiastically endorse and move on. It's very different to say we're instructing you as to how you exactly have to do that, and we've defined how you can talk to the people you serve, what words you can use, and how you can run your programs. So to the extent that the content of the programs and the content of the ways in which you're serving members of the community becomes at issue with documents that you'll be receiving and continue to receive, that's a whole other area of inquiry for us. And protecting the First Amendment rights of nonprofit organizations is going to be a huge area. I just want people to know that there's a lot to be challenged in that arena. This whole DEI ban is already the subject of federal litigation and will continue to be so. And so again, as people receive any of those instructions, please forward them to Nancy initially as we gear up. I'm sure that not everything will have to go across Nancy's desk, but just to make you aware that that's a whole area where defending the integrity of the programs that you've created and that serve the people whom you serve well is going to be a huge battleground, if you will, and one that there's some very powerful tools for that protection, like, for example, the Constitution. And then I want to touch briefly on the third area, which is the integrity and safety of the spaces that the spaces and programs, because I recognize that some of you may be more place-based and have a drop-in center or a facility or a set of places where you provide programming, and others may be less place-based but still have particular people and groups and that you serve. And so particularly as it relates to protecting immigrant clients, but also protecting, for example, LGBTQ plus youth in school and after school programming, we really are trying to provide some general training to nonprofits, and through the Lawyers Committee and with Nancy, we're definitely going to be planning some additional trainings, hopefully a symposium about this whole area of the intersection with the executive branch at this time, but on a very precise basis. We do provide know your rights training for agency staff and leadership about the rights of immigrant clients, undocumented clients, to be safe in your spaces, and specific training about how to keep your programming and spaces safe from an ICE encounter. And so as it relates to that, certainly we want you to have all the information that you need. I'm not going to do this training as part of this conversation today, but if you'd like us to come and meet with a group of you or to come and give a presentation to the staff of a specific agency, we're very happy to do that. And the thumbnail sketch is that you have to establish that you are a private not-for-profit serving your clients and in your programs, and that you reserve the right to only have the invited guests and clients served of your programs in your spaces. You're not a public forum where anyone can just wander by and sit down in your space and start participating in one of your groups or one of your programs. That you actually provide particular services to particular humans who are the people you serve, and that anyone who doesn't have a legitimate purpose for being in your space, for example, an ICE official, would have to have a federal warrant in order to be present in your space. And even with that, it's a very limited grant of entry if there happens to be someone who is named on a warrant. So that's a whole training that we can do for nonprofits. But even just today with this very brief introduction, giving you the opportunity to start thinking, how are we defining our space as for us and those who are invited into our programs? And there's this balance to be struck here because you want your spaces to be safe, welcoming, and affirming. So, putting up all these signs that say, go away, get out, not so affirming, right? So we strike that balance in our own space by saying, we're really by appointment only. And if you need to communicate with us, please reach out via email and phone, and we'll schedule an appointment for you, just to kind of create that boundary so that law enforcement officials understand that the Fourth Amendment applies in your space. It is a private space for your clients and for your staff and for your programming. And then you can have a protocol so that if you ever were to experience an ICE encounter, particularly if your client base is identified or identifiable as potentially containing immigrants, then there are ways to create that boundary of privacy and safety. And we are available to come and offer that training to you all collectively or as individual organizations, because each of you have very particular and different concerns in terms of these, excuse me, safety and privacy issues. But we've already trained close to 1,000 people about how to keep their places of work and service safe, including schools and healthcare providers and nonprofit agencies. And we want you to know that there are actually some very simple steps you can take to ensure the privacy of your space and to have a protocol so that you don't have to feel vulnerable to an ICE encounter, and have a plan in place before that might happen. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there are any questions about that last area, but really more just offering that as a resource for follow-up.
So Lucy would love to have a DV training. So that'll be one of the things we can have in the email chain.
Yeah, because some of us have participated in the trainings already, but I think it would be nice to have that space for advocates to be able to ask those questions, especially on weekends and, evenings when they might be the only one there. I think just hearing it from an attorney might make them feel more empowered, and there might be other questions that they'd like to raise that I'm not aware of. But we have provided some guidance that's been shared, but I do think creating that space might be welcome. So I'll look for the email about that too. Thank you.
Wonderful. And any of the other participants in today's conversation, if that's something that we can be helpful with, even if you just want to have a conversation with me about what that might include, given your particular programming and who you serve and how you do that work, because each one is kind of a customized response depending upon the nature of your work.
Karen?
Yes, Karen.
So will these, Jennifer, will these be virtual? And would you prefer to do like a more generic one, or would you, so like, I'm just thinking of like our community mental health centers, would it be better to do it by topic like you and Lucy were just talking about, or would you rather us go to the generic and see if we need a specific one?
So this is a write your own adventure opportunity. I've already, for example, through the Health Center Association, done a training for all the Health Center Association leadership, but we're also doing them for particular health centers in particular communities with particular presenting issues, right? Because the East Bay Health Center does not face the same issues as the Blackstone Valley Health Center in terms of who is served and what their concerns are. So very happy to have that conversation with any of you after today's meeting. And then we have a process through which we can get things scheduled to do something. Either there may be logical clusters of folks who have commonly held questions. And obviously from a efficiency perspective, that's valuable, but we're also able to customize. And because this is about keeping immigrants safe to a certain extent, as well as others who may be feeling targeted, the mode of the meeting is very important. So a lot of the work we're doing right now with undocumented people is online because they don't want to come to a public meeting where ICE might find out there are going to be undocumented people there. Right. So some of that's just very practical.
Great. Thank you. We'll be in touch for sure, especially now that they're really starting to talk about the Medicaid cut. Anyway, we'll be in touch. So thank you so much. We appreciate everything you guys do.
Yeah, and we will be offering some generic ones just through the Alliance. So if you have folks, maybe you have a targeted one and some people can't come or something, they can come to the generic one with the Alliance, the ones that the Alliance will be doing.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I have to excuse myself, but I want to leave you all with the following affirming message, which is that you are not alone. You can, I know that all of us, including our organization, by the way, because both given our name and the work we do, yeah, we figure we're on someone's radar, and that's fine. And we're here to support you. The Lawyers Committee is organizing to support you and to enable you to continue to do the work consistent with your mission and with the integrity to your values as organizations. So I hope that I've been able to communicate that clearly, at least today. And this is the beginning of a series of conversations.
Thank you so much, Jen. I wanted to just give you a few other updates. So the many of the executive orders have been challenged in court. The issue is that some have gotten restraining orders, which means they can't be implemented while they wind their way through the court system. Others have not yet received a restraining order. And so the implementation presumably can start to take place while they wind their way through the courts. That doesn't mean they won't eventually be found to be unconstitutional or to be illegal and be rescinded. But the current implications are based on whether there is a restraining order on those things. So for instance, birthright citizenship has a restraining order, and so it cannot currently be implemented. The across the board federal funding freeze that was instituted with the Office of Management and Budget memo on January the 27th, that has 2 restraining orders on it, but the judge in the case that was heard in the district court in Rhode Island just ruled that the federal government was not implementing the restraining order, meaning not fully releasing all of the federal funding that it was supposed to be releasing. And so if you have been affected by that funding freeze, particularly not having been fully lifted, if you're still having difficulty accessing funding, please let me know. The Attorney General's office and the congressional delegation want to know where the remaining issues are. We've also heard about some organizations, some programs that had the funding available for a short time and then it was paused again. And so if you're running into any of those difficulties with the funding streams that you're entitled to, if you can please let us know. It can become part of the litigation and the ongoing monitoring of this process. It doesn't mean you have to be public, but it just means that it falls under those court cases. And the congressional staff have also been great at following up with people on those things. So if you can let us know if you are having difficulty currently receiving the federal funding, that would be really helpful. Right now, we are still waiting for full hearings on those funding freeze cases. So a final decision has not been reached, but the federal government is barred from implementing a large-scale funding freeze under any other name while the restraining order is in place. Now that the executive order is still in place, saying that federal agencies need to evaluate their different funding streams based on their alignment with the new administration, and particularly to be looking out for funding streams that are in the areas of immigration, DEI, LGBTQ plus, and gender ideology, whatever that means, environmental justice. So those words and language, to this point, we've seen a lot of kind of just Control F, finding lists of words that are related to these topics that are kind of flagging things. So that right now, in terms of which organizations are kind of in the crosshairs right now, are organizations whose work is funded by the federal government specifically in those issue areas. So DEI work, for instance. The next level that they're looking at is organizations who receive federal funding, but not for those particular issue areas. So it may be that you're receiving federal funding for workforce development, but you also have DEI work that is separate. It's not being funded by the federal government, but it is part of your mission. We've begun to see organizations get notices that they need to, well, at least in one agency has started to say, we're reissuing your contract and we want you to attest to the fact that you are in alignment with the policies, including the DEI policies of this administration. That's obviously problematic. And that is where we're gathering information. So if we can feed into a court case, that would be really helpful. And then the third area is organizations who do not receive any federal funding, but the administration still wants to influence the work and language and communication that is happening at those organizations. So they have the least leverage with those organizations that are private organizations not receiving federal funding, private businesses who are not receiving federal funding. But we do know that they are still looking for ways to try and eliminate DEI even in those organizations, which raises lots of constitutional questions about freedom of speech, because if these are organizations that aren't receiving federal funding, there isn't a reason why the federal government would be involved in controlling what they're saying and doing. So in terms of advocacy and support from the Alliance perspective, we are going to be putting together a workshop together with Massachusetts Nonprofit Network and the Providers Council in Massachusetts and Third Sector New England, focused on the questions around DEI and how to continue to hold on to your mission and your vision and your work in this political climate. So as soon as I have a firm date on that, I will let you know. We are also looking at the questions about funding. So number one, if you're still affected by a funding freeze, please let me know. Number two, if you have questions or concerns about the impact of the executive orders or other federal actions, we have like a comment portal. Please, Robin, maybe you can put that in the chat. Please let us know if you have comments, concerns about the impacts of the executive orders. We also sent a letter to the governor and the director of Department of Administration asking for expedited state contracting and reimbursement for nonprofits, given the funding questions that are swirling because of what's been happening in the federal level, as well as the end of ARPA funding, as well as the state budget deficit. And so if you receive state funding, we would really like to hear from you. Number one, we would like to know if you have currently delayed contracts or reimbursements, because I'm going to be meeting on Friday with the director of purchasing, and he wanted some specific examples of organizations that have not received the funding that they're entitled to, or have a delay in their contracts, so that he can research them and hopefully help. So if you have delayed state contracts or reimbursement, please let me know. If you receive state funding or contracts and just feel like the process is really painful and needs to be improved, we have a comment portal that you can let us know about that, which is in the document the Google Doc that I posted. Robin, can you share again for the document that I posted earlier in the chat? We also have started a mailing list for organizations that receive federal or state funding, so that we can give you updates when we get them about federal and state funding issues. The state is also starting the fiscal year 26 budget process, and we need to make sure that, given the expectation of a significant state level budget deficit of over $200 million, that the state prioritizes providing essential services to the community and doesn't look to those services as places for cuts. And so we are going to be doing an advocacy campaign that we would love to have you participate in. We should have that up fairly soon through our new advocacy platform. And so we really want to get the message to state legislators that we cannot balance the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable Rhode Islanders. And so we need to be thinking about how we can strategize to ensure that those services are sustainable, even if there are fluctuations on the federal level, and even if the state has a budget deficit. So that is going to be coming up in the next week or two. We also have the Economic Progress Institute is leading a Revenue for Rhode Islanders coalition, which is focused on increasing revenue to be able to sustain services instead of looking at cuts to vital services. And we also have introduced a bill to increase the audit threshold for nonprofits. Right now, nonprofits that have revenues from $500,000 to $1 million need to get an audit, and that can cost you $10,000 to $15,000. So that's a lot of money out of a $500,000 budget. The federal government recently raised their single audit threshold to $1 million. And so we are asking the state to increase the state audit limit to match the federal limit. And so we are looking for organizations in that $500,000 to $1 million budget range that would be willing to be part of the advocacy effort for that bill. So if your organization is in that $500,000 to $1 million revenue space, we would love to talk with you.